and welcome to a special episode of Trails and Corridors. Now, when you're walking around Singapore, do you ever look at the street names and wonder, hey, what do they even mean? Why is Changi named Changi? What does Changi even mean? Well, luckily for us today, we have Zhi Xuan here with us. She's a graduate student of Linguistics at NTU, and she's actually done a whole paper on the history of street names in Singapore. So Zhi Xuan, can you tell us a little bit more about your paper and what it's about?
Okay, so our paper actually focused on Singapore's toponymy, so Singapore's place name, and then how it adheres to this concept called Sequent Occupants. So Sequent Occupants is actually a notion from human geography. It states that landscapes over time are shaped by the different various groups that have sequentially occupied a place. So this concept actually applies to, for example, buildings and houses. If you take a walk around downtown Singapore, you may see things like traditional like Chinese shop houses, or like traditional Indian temples, Malay mosques, and all these different buildings actually show you all the different groups that have come to Singapore and left their influence. And then our paper actually expands this concept to place names also. So if you look around Singapore's place names, you can see place names in Malay, in Chinese, even in Hokkien or Cantonese, and then there are Tamil place names, and then of course there's the English place names that we all know. Yeah. So those English place names are the influences of British colonizers. Yeah, and then they left their imprints also. Yeah.
So what about street names or toponymy? Why is it so important for Singaporeans to know about?
I guess if you study a place name and the different names that a place has gone by, you can actually tease out the different layers of history tied to the place. Yeah. So if you study place names of Singapore, you can actually trace back Singapore's history to about 400 years ago, or even 700 years ago. For example, Fort Canning. Yeah.
And for linguists, is it like place names? Are they a very valuable source of information as well?
Okay, so because names are part of language, so if you look at a place's name, then you can find out what language. You can actually see what kind of structures or what kind of sounds, what kind of words this particular group has used for place naming, and what kind of strategies this particular group used. So for example, places which are called Jalan Bunga has the strategy of like naming places associated with flowers. Yeah. Yeah.
So we're actually here at Changi right now, and in your paper there's actually a fascinating history behind the name of Changi. So could you tell us a little bit more about how the name Changi came about?
Okay, so the name Changi, we actually don't know precisely where it came about, but the common consensus is that it comes from botanical items. For example, like the Chengao tree or like a Chengai tree, but those are names of trees. Yeah, and then that will be the namesake for Changi. Yeah, because the people, maybe they saw, this particular tree, it was very characteristic of the place, so they named the place after the tree. Yeah, but the previous name of Changi is Tanjong Rusa. In a map dated 1577, the area was actually labelled as Tanjong Rusa, and then an island above, which we know as Tekong, was actually named Changi. So there might be a hypothesis that the name migrated south for some reason, or it was just a mislabeling on the part of the cartographers. Yeah.
So this is actually when the British came to Singapore and then they labelled the map as
Yes.
Changi.
So a map dated 1822, the area was called Tanjong Changi. Yeah. So the change from Tanjong Rusa to Tanjong Changi, we don't know when was the change, but the Changi name first appeared in 1822. Yeah. So what Tanjong Rusa means in Malay actually is Cape of Deer, but then Singapore is not really known for its deers. So we think it might mean mouse deers, but then mouse deers has a separate word for it, which is kancil in Malay. So this hypothesis maybe doesn't really work out. The other hypothesis is that the name Tanjong Rusa actually comes from this shawl. It's called Beting Kusa. Actually means a dangerous shawl. Yeah. And then this name Beting Kusa actually can be found in a village name, a Malay village name called Kampong Beting Kusa. Yeah. I think this makes sense because if it's a dangerous place, you have to name it to warn people, or either don't come to this place, or you have to take extra caution when you come to this place.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you were actually like researching on like toponymy in Singapore, was there anything fascinating that you found about this topic applied to Singapore in particular? Because I know in Singapore we have a lot of national records, so
Yeah.
does that make it like easier or
Yeah.
trickier? And so
It is definitely easier if you have documentation to help you. Yeah. But then there are some places that you can't find documentations for, and then the most straightforward way to know what the place is called is to actually ask the people, what do you call this place? Yeah, and sometimes they may tell you like histories or stories or legends connected to that place, and those stories may tell you what does the name mean, who named it, how does the place came to be, etc. So the thing unique about Singapore is that I find that the policies, so Singapore has actually toponymic policies to organize Singapore's place names. So Singapore, the policy wants the place names to reflect a multicultural Singapore. But in some cases, they rename places whose original name has a very relevant and very interesting part to the place itself. But then the new name that comes in doesn't have this kind of historical ties to the place. So I find that very interesting, but also quite sad because people won't know the history behind the original name if they don't look for it. Yeah.
any more fun facts?
Fun facts. If you study place names in places which have very ancestral roots, for example, if the place dates back to prehistoric time, the place name itself can actually act as a fossil to the language spoken by the people who once lived there. Those people may not be the current people who live there, so the name of the place can actually tell you what kind of language this was, or maybe it will give us a complete mystery of who these people were, and then we'll start to hypothesize who has been here, what kind of dynamic was it, like did the new people kill the old people, what happened to them, etc. And in some cases, like in Europe, you can actually find traces of languages that have already died. Yeah, so the only remnant was in the place names.
So there you have it, the contentious but fascinating history of the name of Changi. So stay tuned to our next episode to find out about the history of yet another place name in Singapore. See you! Okay.